Good evening, everyone. Can we hear me? Excellent. Looks like we have a quorum. All right, I would like to call this meeting to order. All right, today is Thursday, March 24th, 2022, and this is a meeting of the Rent Stabilization Commission of the City of West Hollywood. We are going to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather, currently known as the City of West Hollywood, is the occupied, unceded territory of the, excuse my mispronunciation, Gabrieleño Tongva and the Gabrieleño Kizh peoples. Vice Chair Copeland, would you like to lead us in the pledge tonight?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you.
I pledge allegiance,
To the flag
of the United States
of America and to the republic
sorry, for which it stands,
and one nation under God,
God,
indivisible,
and
with liberty and justice for all.
Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, a roll call, please.
Commissioner Ayers,
Here.
Commissioner Kirby's,
Here.
Commissioner Maggio,
Present.
Commissioner Montemayor,
Here.
Commissioner Topshin,
Here.
Vice Chair Copeland,
Here.
Chair Moritz.
Present. We have a quorum. Thank you very much. Has everyone had a chance to go over the agenda for tonight? I see lots of yeses. Wonderful. Do we have a motion in a second?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Secretary, a roll call, please.
Commissioner Ayers,
Yes.
Commissioner Kirby's,
Aye.
Commissioner Maggio,
Aye.
Commissioner Montemayor,
Aye.
Commissioner Topshin,
Aye.
Vice Chair Copeland,
Aye.
Chair Moritz.
Aye. Motion passes. Thank you very much. Approval of the minutes from our previous meeting. Has everyone had a chance to review those? I see yeses. Do we have a motion in a second?
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Mr. Secretary, a roll call, please.
Commissioner Ayers,
Yes.
Commissioner Kirby's,
Aye.
Commissioner Maggio,
Aye.
Commissioner Montemayor,
Aye.
Commissioner Topshin,
Aye.
Vice Chair Copeland,
Aye.
Chair Moritz.
Aye. The motion passes, and for the record, that was for February 24th, 2022. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Moving on to public comment. Do we have any public comment for the evening?
Not at this time.
Not at this time. Great. Thank you very much. Manager's report. Mr. Hollow?
Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, Commissioners. Jonathan Hollow, Rent Stabilization Manager. Looking at the look ahead, tonight we were going to have an appeal, but the party timely requested a continuance, so that's been moved to a later date. As you may recall, there was also a resolution that had been requested by the commission to come back based on your deliberations at the last meeting, but and I think this came up perhaps during the appeal that the parties might resolve it, and it appears that they did, and the appeal was withdrawn, rendering that item moot. So tonight it will just be me giving a presentation on Regulation 60089, rent adjustments for security related building improvements. At the next meeting, April 14th, you'll be getting that increase case I've been telling you about. And then we do have 2 more appeals on calendar. I believe there may be another one coming down the pike that may or may not have made it on this current calendar, but we also got the Code Compliance Division coming on May 12th. I've received a report of only 2 new eviction cases since we last met. So it appears that the increase that we had seen was hopefully just a blip. The statewide protections and the application period for the Housing is Key rent relief program ends on March 31st. That said, county protections for tenants unable to make rent due to COVID-19 related reasons comes into effect on April 1st. A reminder that the protections for all tenants runs from the 1st to the 31st. After that, only tenants who are at or below 80% of the AMI can take that protection through December 31st. So I just want to reiterate that any tenant that's experiencing difficulties paying rent or utilities right now should visit www.housingiskey.com immediately and apply for assistance, since that program does stop taking applications on March 31st. Also, just as another issue that came up recently at the council meeting on Monday, council would like commission meetings that meet in council chambers like you do to get back in person as soon as possible. So the item that they will probably be looking at their meeting, the first meeting in April, will be a directive to do that. So provided there's no other surges or anything happening that would prohibit us from meeting in person, that may happen in May. It's not written in stone, of course, until the council acts, and then everything goes according to plan. But just wanted to give you a heads up about that. And I'm available for any questions.
Thank you very much, Commissioners. Questions? Commissioner Kirby, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. I have 2 questions. One relates to the appeal. So the commission had heard the appeal. So they're still allowed to withdraw the appeal because the resolution had not been formally approved. Is that correct?
Right. An applicant can withdraw their application at any time before a final decision is issued. So since the appellant was a tenant of the applicant, it was withdrawn and there's no action to be taken.
Thank you. And the other question I have relates to the return to the council chambers. Will there be a component where the public is able to call in during the meetings or participate in the meetings remotely?
I think so. My understanding from the clerk's office, and I don't know that that's absolutely going to happen. I know that there have been technical issues in the past with doing what have something called a hybrid meeting. Although my understanding of a hybrid meeting is this and people in council chambers as opposed to just people calling in. So I don't know exactly, but that is my understanding for council meetings. I don't know for certain though how commission meetings will be set up. I should have more information on that at the next meeting after council's met.
Okay. I think that's all my questions. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioners, other questions?
Just a quick one, Chair. Mr. Manager, housing is key. Landlords also can apply for the rental assistance. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioners, final questions? Going once, going twice. Sold. Mr. Holub, thank you very much. We'll see you in just a moment. We are moving on to commissioner comments. Do we have any this evening? Commissioner Ayers and then Commissioner Kirby.
Thank you. Just briefly, in the last month, I did attend the Senior Advisory Board meeting. So it was a good meeting for me to attend. They had somebody from the LA LGBT Center give a presentation that included housing, that senior housing set aside for West Hollywood residents in particular on their campus. So that was good to hear. And I also attended the Human Services Commission as part of that input process from the boards and commissions. And afterward, I did make a suggestion to one of the commissioners that if, I let them know that this was great, that they went around to all the boards and commissions for input. I wished the staff had taken all of our collective input and put it in a report that the Human Services Commissioners could have read in advance of the meeting we all showed up at, because we just wound up with 3 minutes each reiterating what we had said during our regular meetings. And I think that the commissioners, the Human Services Commissioners, their time could have been used a lot more productively had they had our comments in a report ahead of time. So I did make that remark. And also, I just want to give a shout out to a lifetime community member, Ruth Williams. She is a former commissioner on this commission, and she recently received the Her Story Award during Women's History Month from the Hollywood chapter of the National Organization for Women. And I just want to congratulate her. Her service on this commission is one of the many accomplishments in her time in the city. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. Commissioner Kerpes.
Yes, thank you. First of all, yes, congratulations to Ruth for the award. And now Hollywood could not have chosen a better recipient of that award. So congratulations to Ruth. I did want to reemphasize, I know Manager Holub just spoke of it, but I want to encourage everyone to please go to housingiskey.com if you are having any problems paying outstanding rent. There's no more future rent because we're already after March 1st. It only goes to March 31st. But if you have any outstanding debt at all to your landlords or to utility companies, please go online and apply. Also, if since the time you have applied, there have been changes, you need to ask for additional months than maybe your original application had requested to bring you up to March 31st. Don't file a new application unless instructed to by the Housing is Key. Just go online and then make changes to your application, or call the 800 number and have someone assist you that way. It'll be much faster. Otherwise, you'd be very much delayed, and I don't know what the outcome will be. But since the date of the since March 30, or since the beginning of this program, as of March 22nd, 2,034 applications have been received from the city of West Hollywood alone, residents of West Hollywood. 1,341 households have been approved and served, and that totals $20 million that have come to the city of West Hollywood residents and landlords. This is money that can be used in our community. Would not otherwise be here had these people not applied and had the federal government not given us this money. And most importantly, this money has been used to keep people housed. So please don't wait any longer. You only have a couple more days. Apply March 31st to housingiskey.com. And then also, just as a side note, if you are a homeowner and you are behind on your mortgage payments due to COVID-19, then you can go to California or camortgagerelief.org, camortgagerelief.org, and find out if you qualify for up to $80,000 in grants to help you reduce your mortgage, outstanding mortgage balances. And with that, Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you. And that's really wonderful to hear all the money that's flowed into our city well housed, because we'd be in a much worse place if that wasn't the case. So thank you for sharing that. Commissioner Maggio.
Yes, I want to take the opportunity to also congratulate my old friend, Ruth Williams, and also to let the commission know a little bit about the history that Ruth was one of the first 5 commissioners on rent stabilization when it was first established in 1985. So I'm very proud of her work in the city. She's still a wonderful advocate and a wonderful friend. And again, congratulations.
Thank you for that, and congratulations to her. Yes, Vice Chair Copeland.
Hi, I just wanted to remind anyone that may have missed these that there was on Tuesday, the 22nd, there was an RSO building blocks webinar with some good updated information for both tenants and landlords. And the slides from that webinar can be viewed on the city's website under rent stabilization and building blocks. And then last night, the 23rd, West Hollywood hosted the housing symposium. which was really thought-provoking and informative. I really enjoyed that. And that video can be viewed on YouTube under WehoTV and Housing Symposium, if anyone would like to view that. Both of those were very informative events. That's it for me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Any other comments, fellow commissioners? I see none. All right. Moving right along in our agenda, we are now at new business. Mr. Hollow, you can come on down.
Thank you. So let me share my screen and get this started. Okay, so what I'm going to discuss tonight is rent adjustments for security-related building improvements. This comes from Rent Stabilization Regulation 60089. And one of the suggestions that had come up in a prior meeting is try to have opportunities to inform the public, landlords and tenants about programs that we have that might be underutilized, and this may be one of them. We don't get these applications too frequently, and hopefully getting this information out will encourage landlords and tenants to cooperate to get services that all parties want. So a landlord may apply for an increase in the maximum level rent for improvements made to a building which enhance security. Such improvements may include, but are not limited to, the installation of fences, walls, gates, exterior or common area doors, including automatic garage doors, intercom systems, exterior or common area lighting, peepholes, security bars, locks, and security windows. A landlord seeking an increase must complete an application for security-related adjustments and submit the application to the Rent Stabilization Division. The application must include the following: a description of the proposed security-related improvement or improvements, a projection of the cost allocated to each affected unit for the improvement, the proposed monthly rent increase for each affected unit based upon the cost of the improvement and the proposed cost recovery period. And in a moment, I'll talk about how that cost recovery works. Approval of the tenants of at least 75% of the affected units as indicated by their original signatures on the application form, and a $25 filing fee. A landlord can't get an increase if the repair or replacement of existing housing services to which the affected tenants are already entitled to that housing service, improvements which are otherwise required by law, improvements for which public funds are available, or properties not in compliance with all applicable state, local health, building, and safety and fire codes. So the approved increases are calculated on the basis of one of the following formulas, which a landlord can choose which one they want to take, and it's part of the application process. The first formula is to divide the per unit cost of the improvement by the amortization period for security related improvements set forth in Regulation 60040.A. And that is a list of services that are capital improvements that also have a corresponding amortization period associated with them. And those can be found in the regulations that the regulation indicated. So that's the first formula that can be used. The other alternative is to divide the per unit cost of the improvement, including an interest rate at a rate equal to 5.5% per annum by an accelerated cost recovery period of 1/2 the number of years set forth in the regulation I just mentioned. So in the example I'm going to give you in a moment, if the item has a 10-year amortization period, in formula number 2, you would reduce that in half, and it would be an accelerated repayment. Either of the above described rent increase calculations may be elected by the owner. As I mentioned, if the increase is calculated based upon the accelerated cost recovery period, it shall remain in effect only for the cost recovery period and shall expire at the end of that period. But if the increase is based upon the standard amortization period, it shall remain in effect as long as the benefit of the security-related improvement remains. So here's an example of the standard amortization. So I chose a new fence as the security feature. If you go to 60040, you'll see that fences have a 10-year amortization period. To make the math as simple as possible, I use an example of a 10-unit building and a total installation cost of $10,000. And the formula is a per unit cost of improvement divided by 10 years, the amortization period, divided by 12 months for each month that the increase is in place, and that gives you your rent increase. So walking through it step by step, we have a $10,000 installation cost, 10 units, it's $1,000 per unit. Step 2 is a 10-year amortization, comes to $100 per unit, and then 100 divided by 12 is $833 per unit per month. And because this is the standard approach, it would just stay in place as long as the tenant is in place and as long as the security feature remains in place. For an accelerated cost recovery, using the same facts, we have the only thing that changes in terms of the basics is that instead of a 10-year amortization period, you take half that and it's a 5-year period. And the formula is the per unit cost improvement times the 5.5% per annum interest divided by the amortization period of 5 years divided by 12 months for your figure. So walking through that, using the example, you have a $10,000 improvement, 10 units, still $1,000 per unit. But with this one, you're adding in the interest rate. So that gives you $1,055 per year. The new amortization rate is 5 years for $211 per unit. Divided by 12 months, the rent increase would be $17.58 per month for 5 years. Following submission of a completed application, the division will determine if the building and the proposed improvements qualify for a rent adjustment. The division will send a notice to each affected tenant, advising the tenants of the work that has been proposed and stating the amount of the increases in the maximum level rent that will be approved for each unit upon satisfactory completion of the work. Within 10 days of the mailing of that notice, any affected tenant may object to the proposed increase. Any objection may be based only on the ground that the minimum number of required signatures was obtained by fraud, misrepresentation, duress, or mistake. If deemed necessary by the division, an evidentiary hearing may be held to resolve the objection. Following the completion of the work, the landlord provides proof of the completion and its cost to the division, including bills, receipts, proof of payment, and photographs of the completed work. Once the division gets the documentation, it will approve and issue a notice of the adjustment in the MAR for each affected unit in accordance with whichever formula the landlord chose. If a rent increase would exceed 12% of the rent currently being paid, any tenant who did not initially approve of the proposed building improvement and increase in the MAR and who could establish that the rent increase would create a hardship may apply to the division, have the increase phased in by a maximum of 12% per year. And upon expiration of the cost recovery period, the maximum rent for each unit which received an increase pursuant to this provision, based upon the accelerated formula, it shall be reduced by the amount of the increase received, plus the proportion of annual general adjustments attributable to the increase. And I am available for any questions.
Excellent, commissioners. Commissioner Topshin and Commissioner Cookies.
Thank you. Mr. Manager, so although we're talking about the increase of the MAR, but this is a cost recovery, this is a surcharge, which my understanding is the landlord cannot include in the annual rent calculations. Is it correct? So they have to separate this from the MAR before applying the general adjustment.
No, this is an increase in the MAR because it's an additional housing service that's agreed upon, in this case by 75% of tenants. So it actually is an increase in the MAR. In the first formula, that increase remains throughout the tenancy, and it would just be treated like any other part of the MAR.
The first formula, yeah.
Yeah, and the second formula, it does go away. Formula. Yeah, and any amount, which obviously would be very small, attributable to that portion, that also, the AGA part of that amount would also be taken away from the overall MAR.
Wait, the first formula, I understand it's incorporated in the rent, and that's the permanent increase. But the second formula, it's a 10-year cost recovery, right?
Well, in the example I gave, it was 5. I mean, it could be if there was a 20-year amortization period for the service, it would be 10. But yeah, that was just the example.
Right, based on your example. So The amount, I think it was what, $17 or something per month, the rent increase? I don't remember.
Yeah, it was about
the formula.
17 and change. Yeah.
Right.
In that example.
So that adds up to the maximum, the rent that the tenant pays, all right? And a tenant can pay as a one payment or can pay two separate, it can make two separate payments, rent separate from that, or they can make a one payment, right?
Well, they should be making one payment because it's part of the rent during that
It's
period.
part of the rent. All right. So, but again, the annual adjustments can apply to the total.
Yes.
Is that the case for any cost recovery, other cost recovery programs is the same? I thought the seismic retrofit within, if I remember, when we were allowing the seismic retrofit cost recovery, we didn't allow this cost recovery to be included in the annual general adjustment.
Well, there is no cost recovery for seismic retrofit. If I recall correctly, I wasn't directly involved with that. The commission may have seen a proposal, but ultimately there was no cost recovery program for the seismic retrofit program.
Well, there were 10 years of maximum payments. I don't remember exactly the numbers, but it was for 10 years, amortization period of 10 years, and the 10 would pay whatever they would pay. But my understanding was that would be separate from the general adjustments.
That may have been the proposal at the time, but this is a different program.
Okay. I just want to know if other commissioners think, because I you know, my understanding is that cost recovery that is only a temporary surcharge, a temporary collection of fees to recover the cost for whatever it is for that should not be part of the base rent. So I believe that should be separate. It's a cost recovery. It's the landlord spend money on doing something. So we're saying that the tenant is also benefits from that work. So then that sum using that second formula will be divided into portions that the tenant pays his or her portion to enjoy the benefits of that, whatever work was done to the property. So it should not be included in the calculations of the annual rent increases. That's my understanding. So, but I want to hear what other commissioners think about it. Thank you.
I think, yeah, Commissioner Kirby's.
Thank you. Thank you for that report, update on this. And I know that we're not here tonight to make changes or anything like that. We're just here to receive the report, but I share concerns as Commissioner Topchian does about the variety of things, but one that this would be included as part of in the same calculation. I know it's, minimal dollars that we're talking annually that would be affected by the annual increase. Let's say 3% of $17 is very little, but that does add up over time. And I don't understand the reasoning or logic behind allowing that. So I would hope that maybe we can bring this. And then I also have concerns about, you mentioned 12% per year, I believe was the maximum or 12% increase was the maximum allowable for any one to be added onto their rent, or is that correct? Maybe you can explain that 12%. Am I understanding that correct?
If the I think it would be unusual for it to be more than 12% of someone's rent, but if it were, then and a tenant who specifically did not participate in the approval process, that wasn't one of the 75% or more of those tenants who said they wanted this, they can come and say, this is more than 12% of my rent and I don't want it and I can't afford it. And then theirs would not exceed 12%. So there's a protection there for people who might be have a hardship.
Yeah. And I appreciate that the city has that in place, a protection in place. I'm concerned though that it is higher than the state's the recent state rent cap law that puts it at 10%, but 5%, I believe, plus AMI or whatever the calculation is, but it maxes out at 10% per year. Maybe the city would want to review this ordinance and that percentage and why 12% is there rather than 10% or 11%. I don't know when the last time this law was reviewed, but it seems like it'd make more sense to be in line with the state's increase of 10%. And then also what impact the state law may have on this now. And if maybe, for all I know, this could be a completely excluded part of the state law and wouldn't affect it at all. But if someone were to get their rent increase 10% and then have within the same 12-month period, have the property owner institute something like this that would cost them another 10 or 12%. Now we're talking a 20% increase within a 12-month period. That can add up a lot. Even though they are gaining an extra service or an extra security measure, there's improvements being made to the property. I have concerns about that. And I'm thinking maybe this item, we could get not when I say more thorough, there's no critique of the report tonight, but just a more in-depth look at what this regulation is, how it's been applied in the past, what the effects have been, and what changes, when the last time it was reviewed, and what changes we might want to consider, considering at least one new statewide law that wasn't in effect when the city created this ordinance, because I do have concerns about the lasting effects. And I also had a question: is there no stipulation that when a new owner buys the building that this would end? It doesn't make sense to me that you would continue paying an extra fee for a new fence when that new fence is there and you're no longer recouping costs when you have a new owner. So maybe you could answer that part for me, if there's a stipulation that ends when there's a new owner of the building.
Well, yeah, I can answer that first, then I'll go back to your concerns about the state law regarding, the recent AB 1482 law. Relatively, I think that's what you're talking about.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Okay, well, let me answer that one first. This wouldn't apply to those properties. This would only apply to rents to properties that are rent stabilized by the city. So the two separate things. In terms of recovery, I mean, I think, in some cases the purpose is to recover, and just then it goes away. I mean, when the landlord takes that second formula. I see your point, that a new landlord didn't pay for it. I suppose that's something to consider. With respect to the first formula, this has been in effect for quite some time, and is one of the reasons I'm here tonight is because it's underutilized. The first formula, I think, is perhaps written the way it is because you can see that it's a relatively small increase for a housing service that the tenants will receive. And in that respect, it's not necessarily much different from another procedure the city has where when the parties agree on the addition of a new housing service, they can also get approval for an increase in the MAR administratively through that process. This one just has the added, so a few added features. One is it involves the tenants and requires that they, as a group, buy in, as opposed to just one tenant agreeing with the landlord separately that they're going to agree to a new housing service and an increase in the MAR. So I think there were some policy considerations likely that were taken into consideration. One being that, this specifically relates to security related features. So, tenants, want these features, want these security features. And this is a way for landlords and tenants to work together to get that done, and also to allow for the landlord to recover it completely and then end the increase, or to just get a modest increase that follows the tenancy until it's terminated. I understand your points, but it's at this point, I don't think that we don't have much of a history. That's what, and I think that it's it's hard to know like if there's been problems with it because it's underutilized, and I didn't think much about changing it, to be honest, because I just came here tonight to inform you about it and to let the public know about it in the hopes that perhaps landlords and tenants who want to do this might avail themselves of it. So I don't have many thoughts on proposals for amending it at this point, but I'm happy to look into it.
Yeah, Chair Czar, if I continue.
Of course.
So yeah, I agree. I mean, we were not here tonight to make any changes to the policy at all, and I don't expect you to have solutions and answers and arguments of why we should keep it the same or change it. You're absolutely right. I missed that point. And thank you for pointing that out, that AB 1482 would not apply to this because it only applies to non-rent stabilized units in cities that don't have rent control. So I appreciate that. I do still think there's a policy question though, that why would we allow 12% if the state has kind of set a standard of 10%? So that's still something that I think that we might want to reevaluate. And the reason I bring these concerns up and think that we should talk about this more in depth and have some real discussion about whether any of these changes should be made or if there should be any changes made at all is because we do want to promote the programs and services or the opportunities for landlords to utilize these programs that we have in place. But we also want to make sure that we're not setting them up for or the tenants up for failure. We want to make sure the program is up and running and good. And I think that by doing this presentation tonight, this is the first step of promoting this and making sure that the public is aware that they can utilize this program. But as I'm learning about it, I'm concerned before we go full on promoting it. I think there's some questions that need to be answered. In addition to, or what the difference to me in the MAR process, it's, as I understand it, based on your presentation, that this has nothing to do with what the rate of return is in a landlord's profit margin. I mean, this program is not related to whether the landlord is making money or not. I could be a very profitable landlord with my building, and I could use this program to build a new fence, security system, whatever, and I would be able to go through this process and raise the rents. Whereas the other process is I have to prove that I'm not receiving a reasonable rate of return. And I think that is a different system, and that we all, to preserve our rent stabilization ordinance, need to look at in a different way. So I don't see the two programs as the same, and I do feel very strongly about that. Any additional increase should not be affected by the annual MAR increase or the annual adjustment, as Commissioner Topshin pointed out. And then also should end when a new property owner comes on. They take on all the new responsibility. They've done their numbers, they've done their due diligence to find out whether they're going to make money or not. And that's kind of where I feel we should be at. With that, thank you again for the presentation. This is new information to me tonight, and I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Maggio.
Yes, as I remember, the law or the rule of capital improvement, which I think only came to us on two occasions, maybe about 25 years ago, that the capital improvements, there was a cap of 10%, and then that 10% would only be temporary, and then it would be dismissed after recovery. And I think those are some of the points the other two commissioners have pointed out. And if that still is an existing law on our books, it would be interesting if we would have seen perhaps a chart where there's a comparison and how it would differ from how it was first established. And maybe Jonathan could help clarify that, please.
If you're referring to the rent increase process, it's actually the cap is for a given year. I think it actually is 12% in the code, not 10%. But could you reiterate what the question was, if I haven't answered it?
Well, I believe it. I mean, we haven't looked at this in many years, so I'll have to do my own research. But as I recall, there was a cap of 10%, and then that could be passed on until there was the recovery. It could be passed on into the rent. And then when there was the recovery of whatever the service, improved service was, then it would be dismissed and the rent would go back to where it was. That's
you might
what
be
I'm saying.
right. Just as you noted, those cases are far and few between, and the commission hasn't seen one in a long time. And I don't know the answer to that question.
I remember it, as I said, in the 90s, as I recall, that we did have one or two capital improvement cases that came before us with a 10% cap. And that's how it was done. Once that could be passed on in the rent, but it never became part of the maximal allowable rent. Some way it was added, and once it was achieved, then it was taken off and the rent went back to what the original MAR was after the recovery.
Right. That might,
Maybe we could look.
that doesn't sound, that sounds correct. But I'd have to do more research into that and compare it relative to this program and see if there's a difference.
Because it would be a way of, getting around the MAR, it would just increase, and it wouldn't, you're going to still be paying for that improvement after there's been a recovery. I don't think it's fair. Thank you.
Commissioner Ayers.
Thank you. I just have a quick question. So if a landlord decides to do a security improvement, such as replace all the screen doors for each unit in a building, and with a security screen door, a lockable screen door, would this program, or require the landlord to do all of the units, or could he choose to do some of the units if some tenants didn't want the new screen door? How does that work? Is it an all or nothing thing, or how would the landlord proceed with that?
They could do it for units specifically, as long as the cost was only allocated among those units that actually got the service.
Got it. Thank you.
And you would need 75% of the affected tenants to agree to it. So if you were adding it to you could add it to other doors, but probably ideally, if you're only adding it to some doors, you want buy-in from all those tenants who are actually participating. And there's another way to do this as well, which would be through mediation and just the addition of a housing service and approval administratively, which is certainly simpler.
Great. Commissioner Kirkpatrick.
Just to clarify what you just mentioned, that would be the landlord and the tenant coming to mediation and agreeing upon the tenant paying $50 a month for the next X amount of months for the landlord to install a security door on their unit, right? Whatever that agreement might be. And then it would be sealed and signed and agreed to by the city. Is that what you're talking about, mediation?
Yeah, well, I use mediation as as a route, because if they can't just agree to it, then obviously that's a good tool, and we offer that service. How it usually happens is it wouldn't necessarily be for a set period. It would be permanent because it's an added housing service, and the agreed upon amount would be added to the MAR. So it's not necessarily, it's not cost recovery, really. It's just a recognition that there is an additional housing service, just as when we hear cases where the housing service has been taken away, there's a rent decrease until it's returned, if it's returned. This is the going in the other direction, where there's an additional housing service that allows for a recognition of a certain amount of rent to be added to the MAR.
So it sounds to me like there's a variety of ways, even with or without this law, that if a tenant and landlord both agreed to do something, both agreed that the tenant would pay more, both agreed what the new service would be, that there are other routes that can be used to successfully do that. And so that kind of brings me to just a clarifying question from earlier. When you mentioned 75% of the folks had to sign on to it, there's no thing that prevents a landlord from offering $100 or anything like that to each of the tenants who do sign on? That's not always a bad thing, by the way. I'm just suggesting that as an example. Is that correct? There's nothing that in the statute that prevents, it's not a cash for keys, it's just a kind of incentive to sign on to this agreement. Tenant would be fully aware of what they're signing on to, but is that correct?
Giving them like a bonus for agreeing to the entire process?
Yeah,
Something
I mean,
like
whatever, tickets to the game, I don't know, whatever the incentive might be. There's something that precludes the landlord from doing that.
Yeah, I've never heard of that, but I don't see why it wouldn't be allowed.
And
it's a private agreement. It's a private agreement. Yeah.
And finally, just to go back to that, the private agreement, is there anything that prevents are agreements with landlords and tenants on their own allowed? I live in a rent stabilized unit. I want to, let's just use the example of the security screen. I want a security screen on my door. I work it out with my landlord that I will pay $25 extra a month until the end. There's nothing that prevents that from happening, or is that actually technically a violation of the rent stabilization ordinance because it's a rental?
Yeah, it would be a technical violation because it wasn't done through because the city regulates rents after the tenancy starts, and there's a specific process in place for the landlord to get a higher MAR, either, as was mentioned earlier, through a rent increase process, which was also mentioned we rarely see, but more often we see this situation where, using your example of a security door for the individual unit, they should be coming in, and there's a separate application for that process and going through that process, so that down the road, if there's any dispute about what the MAR is, it's clear and it's formal and it's done through the proper regulatory process. It isn't done just as that part of the private agreement is not going to work. I mean, the example you gave of like, hey, here's tickets to a game, please, will that incentivize you to be one of the 75%? We don't regulate that, but we do regulate the rents. So if it's done outside that formal process, the landlord could find themselves surprised if, let's say, they come in for a MAR hearing later on, and the tenants decide that he or she doesn't want to pay for that anymore. As far as the city knows, that additional housing service was never formally integrated into the tenancy or to the rent. So there is that formal process that the parties should be following.
Yeah, that was my main point, was that it would only be successful if both parties continued to allow it to be successful. Otherwise, the landlord is in high risk, liable. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Topshin.
Thank you. Mr. Manager, I realize tonight's discussion is just to receive and file. And I know there's nothing you can do at this time, or we can't do propose anything. But perhaps we can come back about the discussion of the cost recovery and how the cost recovery rules or regulations would apply to capital improvement, seismic retrofit, or for this, or primary renovation. When, let me put it this way, if we could clarify if the cost recovery, if it is a cost recovery, it cannot be treated as a permanent rent increase. So that's why it's called cost recovery. So they recover a portion of the spending on adding whatever it is, or making these renovations, or doing this capital improvement, or making some changes. So they share the cost with the tenant by participating in the system that the city provides, the offers. And that's why you have the first formula, second formula. But both formulas, well, the first formula clearly is saying it is a permanent rent increase. So that I wonder if for a permanent rent increase, there should be some different program versus the capital improvement can be can use Formula 1 or Formula 2. I think for a permanent rent increase, it should be a very substantial, very serious, or very massive change or addition to the structure, maybe to the building, or to whatever it is. But 12% rent increase, it's significant. Because I'm sure every landlord would try to, go, through the first formula, or the first, from the possibility of permanently increasing the rent versus the second formula, which is a temporary surcharge, cost recovery for capital improvement. So I'm thinking that maybe we can separate the permanent rent increase. It's not a cost recovery. It's a permanent rent increase for something, primary renovation, maybe, that has to do with some major structures, systems, I don't know what, electrical, plumbing, or whatever it is, or if significant changes are needed to the building or structure. And that's when the city may review and decide, okay, it's a permanent rent increase, not a cost recovery. But the second formula seems to me, if we're calling it a cost recovery, it should be applicable for capital improvement, or for this tonight's discussion, the topic, or seismic retrofit, or whatever it is, but it has to be temporary. And it should not become part of the maximum adjusted rent. Otherwise, it's no longer a temporary cost recovery. It will become a permanent rent increase, and it's not fair to the tenant, because the landlord will recover whatever the landlord spent, or half of it. And then even it's a very little portion of it, but the tenant will continue paying, and every year it will increase gradually. So I don't know if it's somewhere in the book, there is something that you can find to decide, to determine that the cost recovery is a temporary and cannot become part of the maximum adjusted rent. I would like really to have this kind of heard, or at one of our meetings, and maybe at that time we can come up with some sort of very smart ideas for you.
Yeah, I think that's something that was going to come to the commission anyway. We do, even though it doesn't happen very frequently, it's happening at their next meeting. You're going to be reviewing an increased case.
Yeah.
It's extraordinarily unusual. That's why it's not something we investigate and then bring to the commission. But that doesn't mean it's not important, because it can happen, and it is going to happen. And there are things in the code that do need to be reviewed. So I anticipate that this will be part of a larger discussion.
Okay.
That will happen in the relatively near future. There are probably some other items that may take priority over that, but definitely this year, I anticipate some proposals will be brought before you regarding these issues.
Right, because I don't want the landlords to think, oh, okay, so this is great, so I'm gonna do something I'm going to add something to the unit or to the property, and I'm going to apply for this, and I'm going to do it every year. And this way, because as far as I understood that once a year they can submit an application, or every time they do something, they can apply for the cost recovery. And if the cost recovery is not temporary, it's permanent, then with every application, you basically anticipate this will become a permanent rent increase incorporated in the MAR. So this is sort of like a going around the RSO general adjustment percentage and gradually increasing it by just adding a security door or adding, I don't know, vanity or you know, changing something in the kitchen. I don't know what that
this
could be.
discuss. I mean, with this discussion, I mean, with this regulation, it's purely security related items. I mean, there's a I think probably one of the reasons this was enacted was because this is value added for everybody, especially the tenants. It's not a vanity. It's got to be a security related item. So it's really two different things.
Okay.
There's this specific. This is cost recovery for a very. First of all, it's actually couched as a rent adjustment. But there are two different formulas, one which will end and the other which will be an ongoing rent adjustment. But at the same time, we're talking about a very specific type of improvement to the building. And obviously, since it's been underutilized, in my opinion, it's not being abused. It's just not being used.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I agree with you. So we should not just dump everything at this point you know, because we have a completely different issue. But maybe, yeah, perhaps we can schedule, as you said, some in some of the meetings, so we can, in the future meetings, we can bring up this question again, because I'm not comfortable with the cost recovery becoming a permanent rent increase.
I understand.
Thank you.
Commissioner Maggio, and then Vice Chair Copeland.
Yes, I just would like to add or reiterate, it sounds like we're all saying the same thing. We believe in capital improvement, and we believe that there should be a recovery, but we don't. We agree that that the rent should not continue in the rent, and that it should only be temporary. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Copeland.
Hi, yes, I sort of echo that. If at all possible, that increase should not just go on in perpetuity. You know, once there's been a recovery made, there's no benefit to the tenant any longer to just keep paying for something that's already been paid for. But I had just a couple of quick questions for you, Mr. Manager. So to clarify, this would not be for a landlord to try to upgrade or replace a security measure that's already in place. Like the fence is not in great shape, so I'm going to buy a new one. I'm going to apply for this and put the cost to the tenants. This is for new security measures.
Right, because the regulation specifically states that it can't be used for one that the tenant is already entitled to. And if it's an existing housing service, then they.
So if they want to change it up or upgrade it, if it's already exists, then that's not qualified. Okay.
Right.
The other question was, is there currently any state or local law or ordinance that you're aware of that requires landlords with the doors that provide ingress and egress to like common areas? Are they supposed to have locking mechanisms in place? Or I thought that used to be something that was a state law, but I don't know if it is currently.
I'm not sure exactly what the code says. Fortunately, you're going to have Danny Rivas here in a couple of weeks.
Okay.
That would be a good question for him.
Yeah. I thought at one time there was a state law that did require that, because a common area can cover a lot of things. Your parking area, your pool area, your hallways, laundry room. And if those are currently not locked and they don't want to provide new doors or secure doors, I just didn't know if that was something that we could apply toward or require, them to do if it is a state law. I don't know. But I will ask Mr. Rivas that if he knows that when he shows up. But thank you so much for this. I appreciate the information and the report. And that's all I will bother you with right now. Thank you.
Thank
you, Chair.
You're welcome. There is state law on deadbolts and whatnot. I can't speak to those. I think Mr. Rivas will be better, but yes, those are still on the books on the state level. Commissioner Kirby.
Can I make a motion or if Commissioner Topshin wants to, I don't mind seconding it, but make a motion that the staff return to the commission with on the same subject, providing another review at that point, and of this ordinance, and also providing any backup material, like instances where this has been used in the past, or up to 3 times, not every time in history, but maybe 2 or 3 examples of where this has been used in the past. So we have some case studies to look at. And based upon this conversation tonight, the concerns have been expressed, staff's response and kind of analysis of some of those concerns in a report sometime between now and, like, say, the end of August, if that's the timeline that Mr. Holland thinks is reasonable.
Yeah, the end of August should be fine. That shouldn't be a problem.
So that's my motion.
I have a motion.
I'll second it.
Motion and a second. Can we have a roll call on that?
Commissioner Ayers,
Aye.
Commissioner Kirkes,
Aye.
Commissioner Maggio,
Aye.
Commissioner Montemayor,
Aye.
Commissioner Topshin,
Aye.
Vice Chair Copeland,
Aye.
Chair Marks.
Aye. The motion passes. Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Holler, for that presentation and answering robust questions on that matter. And we will see you back on that matter in the near-ish future. Okay, do we have any items from staff?
No further items from staff. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, do we have any public comment that has come in?
No public comments.
Okie dokie. Commissioners, any additional comments from the commission? Yes, Commissioner Ayers.
Thank you. I just wanted to bring up, someone who lives in the city of West Hollywood saw an article in the LA Times that talked about how the city of LA City's Council is considering some new, ordinances that would limit how landlords in Los Angeles can screen potential renters. The article appeared in the LA Times on March 9th, and they asked me, does West Hollywood have these protections in place already? And I was not sure. So I'm bringing it up here because I'm more is just a curiosity. So I can answer a question, because I don't know if these proposals that the City Council of LA is considering would even be a good fit for West Hollywood, but I just wanted to be able to answer that question. So is that something I may ask city staff to just look into for a future meeting?
Commissioners, could you send me the article?
I will.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
I'll take a look at it, and I'll come back and tell you whether there's anything that we have currently in place or my thoughts on it.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Other commissioners, Commissioner Kirkes?
I just wanted to thank Jonathan and his staff for bringing this and other items to the commission. I know that he probably regrets bringing this one to the commission tonight, but we do appreciate it. And we know you'll be bringing more items to us to talk about and expand all of our knowledge and the public's awareness. So we appreciate that, and thank you.
Thank you. Other commissioners? I do not see any. Okay, wonderful. We are adjourning now. The next meeting of the Rent Stabilization Commission will be held via teleconference on Thursday, April 14th, 2022 at 7 p.m. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Good night.
Good night. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you, staff, again.
And always.
Appreciate you. Yeah.